In Detroit's shadows, Emma Carter, a secret captain, faces Officer Harris's racial wrath. As his aggression escalates and cameras roll, a hidden badge waits to turn the tide. Will her calm defiance spark justice or ignite a city's fury? The truth unfolds, and the crowd holds its breath. Get ready for a story that'll pull you in so deep, you won't be able to walk away. This is not just a tale, it's an experience you'll feel. So before we begin, hit subscribe to Black Battles, where every story hits harder than truth itself. The first light of dawn crept through the curtains of Emma Carter's modest Detroit apartment, casting a soft glow across the hardwood floor. It was a rare day off for Emma, a police captain in the Internal Affairs Division, and she intended to savor it. No badge, no uniform, just a chance to blend into the rhythm of the city she'd sworn to protect. She stretched languidly, the faint ache in her shoulders a reminder of the weight she carried daily, both as an officer and as a black woman navigating a world that often felt stacked against her. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as she stood by the kitchen counter, her fingers tracing the rim of her favorite mug, a gift from her daughter Lily, inscribed with the words, "Strongest Mom I Know." Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from Lily, now away at college, lit up the screen. "Proud of you, Mom. Stay safe today." Emma's lips curved into a smile, warmth spreading through her chest. She typed a quick reply, "Love you, kiddo. Always," before tucking the phone into her pocket. Lily's words were a lifeline, a reminder of why she endured the long hours and the scrutiny of her role. As a captain, Emma investigated the very officers she worked alongside, rooting out corruption in a department plagued by mistrust. But today she wanted to be just Emma, a woman running errands, not a symbol of authority. She slipped into a simple sweater and jeans, her badge left deliberately in a drawer, and headed out into the crisp October morning. Detroit's streets buzzed with life, vendors setting up carts, kids laughing on their way to school, and the distant hum of traffic. But as Emma drove through the city, a subtle tension gnawed at her. Police cruisers seemed to linger on every corner, their lights flashing in the early light. She noticed the neighborhoods where they rarely patrolled, their presence heavy, almost oppressive. Her years on the force told her this wasn't routine. It felt like a show of force, though she couldn't pinpoint why. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on her destination, a local college where she'd been invited to speak. The lecture. Hall at Wayne State University was a sea of young faces, their eyes curious but guarded. Emma stood at the front, her posture relaxed, her voice warm but firm. She'd chosen not to mention her rank, introducing herself simply as Emma Carter, a Detroit resident with a passion for community policing. "I'm here to listen," she said, scanning the room. "How many of you have had a negative experience with the police?" The question hung in the air, and slowly, nearly every hand rose. A ripple of unease passed through Emma, though she'd expected it. The students' faces told stories of fear, anger, and betrayal, sentiments she knew too well, both from her own life and from the complaints that crossed her desk. A young woman in the front row spoke first, her voice trembling. "Last week, an officer stopped me for no reason, said I looked suspicious. I was just walking home." Others nodded, their stories spilling out, unwarranted searches, harsh words, and a pervasive sense of being targeted. Emma listened, her heart heavy but her resolve steady. "Knowing your rights is your power," she told them, her tone calm but commanding. "Stay composed, document everything, and don't let anyone take your dignity." She shared practical tips, how to de-escalate, when to record, and why staying calm could be an act of defiance. A student raised a hand, his voice sharp. "What if they don't care about our rights?" Emma met his gaze. "Then you hold your ground with dignity. That's something they can't take." The discussion stretched on, the students' questions, probing deeper into the fractures between law enforcement and the communities they served. Emma felt a flicker of hope in their engagement, their willingness to speak out. But beneath it, she sensed their fear, their exhaustion, a mirror of her own at times. As the session ended, students approached her, some thanking her, others slipping her notes with stories they hadn't shared aloud. She tucked them into her bag, promising to read everyone. Stepping outside, the autumn air felt sharper, the weight of their words lingering. She didn't notice the police cruiser parked across the street, its occupant watching her with narrowed eyes. Emma's drive back through the city was quieter, her mind replaying the students' stories. She thought of Lily, of the world she wanted her daughter to inherit, one where trust wasn't a luxury. As she stopped at a light, her eyes caught another cruiser, its officer staring a little too long. The unease she'd felt earlier returned, sharper now. She didn't know that Officer Daniel Harris, a man with a reputation for volatility, had already marked her as a target. Today was supposed to be her escape, a day to breathe. But in Detroit, where the line between protector and predator could blur, Emma was about to face a storm she hadn't anticipated. Emma Carter's boots crunched against the gravel lot as she pulled into Evelyn's diner, a cozy beacon of warmth nestled in Detroit's bustling west side. The diner's neon sign flickered, casting a soft glow over the street, and the scent of fried chicken and cornbread wafted through the air. It was a place where the community gathered, where stories were shared over steaming plates and laughter drowned out the city's noise. For Emma, it was a sanctuary, a place to shed the weight of her badge and simply be. She pushed open the glass door, the bell jingling overhead, and was greeted by the familiar sight of Evelyn Brooks behind the counter, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her smile wide but tinged with worry. "Emma girl, you're a sight for sore eyes," Evelyn said, wiping her hands on her apron before pulling Emma into a warm hug. The diner was alive with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, but Evelyn's voice dropped low, her eyes darting toward the door. "We need to talk." Emma's brow furrowed, sensing the shift in Evelyn's tone. She slid into a booth near the window, the vinyl creaking under her weight, and waited as Evelyn poured her a coffee, the mug steaming in the cool air. "It's that Officer Harris again," Evelyn whispered, leaning close. "He's been coming round harassing my customers, especially the black folks. Yesterday he roughed up young Jamal just for sitting at the counter too long." Emma's grip tightened on her mug, her jaw clenching. Officer Daniel Harris was no stranger to her. His file sat on her desk in internal affairs, thick with complaints. Excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation. Yet he'd somehow evaded serious consequences. The department's leniency gnawed at her, a reminder of the systemic rot she fought daily. "What did he do this time?" Emma asked, her voice steady but her eyes sharp. Evelyn recounted the incident, Harris storming in, demanding IDs, tossing insults laced with venom, his badge a shield for his aggression. "He's got this look, Emma," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "Like he enjoys it. Folks are scared to come here now." The words hit Emma like a punch. Evelyn's diner wasn't just a business. It was a lifeline for the neighborhood, a place where kids did homework, elders swapped stories, and families found solace. The thought of Harris poisoning that space ignited a fire in her chest. But today, she'd left her badge at home, wanting to be just another patron, not the captain who'd have to act. Still, her training kicked in, Herman cataloging Evelyn's words as evidence. "I'll look into it," she promised, her tone soft but resolute. Evelyn's eyes softened with relief, but she leaned closer. "Be careful, Emma. He's got it out for anyone who stands up to him." As Emma sipped her coffee, the diner's warmth couldn't fully chase away the chill of Evelyn's warning. She glanced around, noting the familiar faces, a mother coaxing her toddler to eat, a group of teens laughing over fries. These were her people, the ones she'd sworn to protect. But the weight of her role pressed harder now, the invisible badge in her drawer, a constant reminder of her responsibility. She wanted to act, to pull Harris's file and start the process to hold him accountable, but something held her back. She needed more than complaints. She needed proof that would stick. Outside, the street buzzed with afternoon life, but Emma's eyes caught a glint of something unsettling. A police cruiser parked across the road, half hidden by a delivery truck. Its driver sat low, his cap tilted, watching the diner with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She couldn't see his face, but the posture was unmistakable. Daniel Harris. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral, years of training keeping her composed. Had he followed her from the college? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. If Harris was watching, he was already making mistakes. Evelyn slid a slice of pecan pie onto the table, her smile forced. "On the house," she said, but her eyes flicked toward the window, catching the same cruiser Emma had noticed. The unspoken understanding between them was clear. Trouble was brewing. Emma took a bite of the pie, the sweetness grounding her, and nodded. "I'll handle it," she said, her voice low but firm. She paid her bill, leaving a generous tip, and stepped outside, the autumn air sharp against her skin. The cruiser was gone now, but the unease lingered, a shadow trailing her steps. As she walked to her car, she didn't see Harris's eyes following her from a side street, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his smirk hiding a growing obsession. Emma thought she was just another face in the crowd today, but Harris had other plans, and their paths were about to collide in a way neither could predict. Emma Carter's footsteps echoed softly on the cracked sidewalk as she approached her car, parked under the fading glow of a Detroit street lamp. The autumn air carried a bite, but her mind was still warm with the comfort of Evelyn's diner and the weight of the stories she'd heard there. Her keys jingled in her hand, the meter still ticking with plenty of time left. She was ready to head home, to sink into the quiet of her apartment and process the day. But as she rounded the corner, her heart sank. Officer Daniel Harris leaned against her car, his arms crossed, a smirk twisting his lips. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming, but his eyes held a malice that made her stomach tighten. "You think you can park wherever you want?" Harris drawled, his voice low and taunting, laced with an edge that set Emma's nerves on high alert. She stopped a few feet away, her posture relaxed but her senses sharp, years of training kicking in. "The meter's paid, officer," she said evenly, nodding toward the ticking display. "I'm just heading home." Her tone was calm, deliberate, but inside her pulse quickened. She knew Harris's type, power-hungry, reckless, hiding behind a badge to mask his insecurities. His file flashed through her mind. Complaints of harassment, excessive force, all dismissed for lack of evidence. Harris stepped closer, his boots scuffing the pavement, his smirk widening. "People like you always think you're above the law," he spat, the words dripping with racial venom. He leaned in, close enough for Emma to smell the stale coffee on his breath, and deliberately kicked her tire, the thud echoing in the quiet street. Then with a slow, calculated move, he spat on her shoe. The act was so brazen, so deliberate, that it drew sharp gasps from a handful of passers-by who had paused, their phones already out, capturing the scene. Emma's hands trembled, not with fear, but with the effort to restrain the fire in her chest. She held his gaze, her brown eyes steady, refusing to give him the reaction he craved. "You got a problem?" Harris taunted, stepping even closer, his voice rising to draw attention. A small crowd gathered, shoppers, teens, an elderly man with a cane, all watching, their murmurs growing. Emma's mind raced. She could reveal her identity now, flash the badge tucked away in her bag, and end this. But something stopped her. Harris was unraveling, his arrogance a rope tightening around his own neck. She wanted him to go further, to give her the evidence she needed to bury him. "I'm just trying to get to my car, officer," she said, her voice a calm anchor amidst his storm. "Is there a specific issue with my parking?" Harris laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Issue? The issue is you, acting like you own this street." His words were a blade cutting through the air, and the crowd's murmurs turned to whispers of outrage. A young woman clutching her phone stepped forward, her voice shaky but bold. "She didn't do anything. Why are you hassling her?" Others nodded, their cameras rolling, the red lights of their devices like tiny beacons in the dusk. Harris's eyes flicked to the crowd, his smirk faltering for a split second before hardening again. "Mind your business," he snapped, his hand resting on his holster, a silent threat. Emma's heart pounded, but her face remained a mask of composure. She knew the playbook: de-escalate, document, survive. "Officer, I'm complying," she said, her voice clear, carrying to the crowd. "Can you state the reason for this stop?" Harris's face reddened, his control slipping. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone he'd clearly underestimated. "You're obstructing an officer," he growled, his hand twitching toward his cuffs. The crowd grew louder, their voices a chorus of dissent. "That's not a reason." A man shouted. "Let her go," called another. Emma felt the weight of their support, a fragile shield against Harris's aggression. She noticed a teenage boy in the crowd, his phone held high, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. She gave him a subtle nod, a signal to keep recording. Her bag hung heavy at her side, her badge inside, a trump card she wasn't ready to play. Harris was digging his own grave, and she needed every second of this on record. But as he stepped closer, his hand grazing her arm, a chill ran through her. This wasn't just about her anymore. The crowd, the cameras, the city watching. It was a powder keg, and Harris was striking matches. Emma stood her ground, her dignity her armor, unaware that Harris's obsession with her was about to ignite a confrontation that would shake Detroit to its core. The air on the Detroit street crackled with tension as Officer Daniel Harris loomed over Emma Carter, his face twisted with a mix of arrogance and fury. The crowd around them grew, their phones held high, red recording lights piercing the dusk like fireflies. Emma stood rooted, her heart pounding but her expression a mask of calm defiance. Harris's spit still glistened on her shoe, a deliberate insult that had sparked gasps and murmurs of outrage from the onlookers. Their voices, angry, indignant, formed a chorus that seemed to fuel Harris's recklessness. "You're under arrest for obstructing an officer," he barked, grabbing Emma's wrist with a force that made her wince. The crowd erupted, shouts of "she didn't do nothing" and "let her go," cutting through the evening air. Emma's mind raced, her years as a police captain in internal affairs sharpening her instincts. She could resist, flash her badge, and end this farce in seconds, but she held back. Harris was unraveling, his every move a nail in his own coffin, and the crowd's cameras were capturing it all. She needed this evidence, undeniable and raw, to ensure he'd face consequences this time. "You'll need to state a lawful reason for this, officer," she said, her voice steady, carrying over the growing clamor. Her words were a lifeline, grounding her as Harris's grip tightened, his fingers digging into her skin. The crowd surged closer, their outrage palpable, phones trembling in their hands but still recording. Harris's eyes darted to the onlookers, his smirk faltering under their scrutiny. "You think you're smart, huh?" he snarled, yanking her arm to pull her toward his cruiser. Emma didn't resist, her body pliant but her gaze unyielding. She knew the law better than he did. Obstructing an officer required intent, and she'd done nothing but stand her ground. The crowd's shouts grew louder, a young woman's voice rising above the rest. "This is going viral. You can't do this." A man nearby, his voice thick with anger, yelled, "We see you, officer. This ain't right." Emma caught the eye of a teenage boy filming from the edge of the crowd, his face a mix of fear and determination. She gave him a subtle nod, urging him to keep the camera rolling. As Harris fumbled with his cuffs, his radio crackled to life, a dispatcher's voice cutting through. "All units, robbery in progress 2 blocks east, suspect armed." The call was urgent, but Harris ignored it, his focus locked on Emma. The crowd noticed, their murmurs turning to accusations. "He's ignoring a real crime," a woman shouted. Emma's chest tightened. His negligence was another mark against him, one she'd ensure was documented. "Officer, there's an active call," she said calmly, her words deliberate, meant for the cameras as much as for him. Harris's face reddened, his temper flaring. "Shut up," he snapped, snapping the cuffs onto her wrists with a clang that echoed in the tense air. The crowd's outrage swelled, some stepping closer, their voices a rising tide. "You're on camera, man," a man called, his phone held high. "This is abuse," cried another. Emma felt their support like a shield, but she also sensed the danger. A wrong move could turn this into chaos. She kept her breathing even, her dignity intact even as the cold metal bit into her wrists. Her bag, still slung over her shoulder, held her badge, a secret she wasn't ready to reveal. Let Harris think he had the upper hand. Every second he pushed further, he gave her more to work with. She glanced at the young woman filming, her eyes fierce with purpose, and mouthed, "Keep going." The woman nodded, her phone steady. Harris shoved Emma toward his cruiser. His movements rough, almost desperate. The crowd followed. Their phones a constellation of lights, their voices a drumbeat of dissent. Emma's mind cataloged every detail. Harris's ignored radio call, his unwarranted aggression, the racial venom in his earlier words. She knew internal affairs would dissect this, and she'd make sure they had everything. But a flicker of unease crept in. Harris's eyes held a glint of something darker than arrogance. Obsession, perhaps, or a personal grudge she hadn't yet uncovered. Why her? Why today? The questions gnawed at her as he opened the cruiser door, his hand heavy on her shoulder. As he pushed her toward the back seat, the crowd's shouts reached a fever pitch, a collective cry for justice that echoed down the street. Emma remained composed, her voice low but firm. "This isn't over," she said, just loud enough for Harris to hear. His smirk wavered, a crack in his bravado, but he slammed the door shut, sealing her inside. Outside, the cameras kept rolling, the crowd's anger a spark ready to ignite. Emma sat in the dim cruiser, her cuffs cold but her resolve burning. She wasn't just a victim, she was a captain, and Harris was about to learn the cost of crossing her. The inside of Officer Daniel Harris's cruiser smelled of stale coffee and leather, a claustrophobic cage where Emma Carter sat, her wrists bound by the cold bite of handcuffs. Outside, the Detroit street pulsed with the crowd's growing outrage, their voices a rising tide of shouts and accusations, their phones capturing every second of the unfolding drama. Harris stood by the cruiser, his chest puffed out, barking at the onlookers to disperse, but his words only fueled their defiance. Emma's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the electric clarity of the moment. She'd let Harris think he'd won, let him dig deeper into his own arrogance, but now the tide was turning. Her bag, still slung over her shoulder, held the key to unraveling his power play. Her badge, a symbol of authority he hadn't anticipated. Harris's radio crackled again. The dispatcher's voice urgent. "Unit 12, report to robbery in progress, 2 blocks east." He ignored it, his focus locked on Emma, his eyes gleaming with a mix of triumph and malice. The crowd noticed, their voices sharper now. "He's ignoring a real crime," a man shouted, his phone held high. "This is why we don't trust y'all," cried a woman, her camera steady. Emma's gaze flicked to the young woman she'd noticed earlier, still filming, her face fierce with determination. Their eyes met and Emma gave a subtle nod, a silent plea to keep recording. Every frame was evidence, every second a nail in Harris's coffin. Harris yanked open the cruiser door, his smirk twisting into a sneer. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" he growled, reaching for Emma's bag. "Let's see what you're hiding." The crowd pressed closer, their murmurs a low hum of anticipation. Emma's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice calm, her words measured for the cameras. "You're searching my property without cause, officer," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Harris ignored her, his fingers rummaging through her bag with a reckless confidence. He expected to find something to justify his actions. Drugs, a weapon, anything to pin on her. Instead, his hand froze as it closed around a small leather wallet. He pulled it out, flipping it open, and his face drained of color. The badge gleamed in the streetlight. Captain Emma Carter, Internal Affairs Division, Detroit Police Department. A hush fell over the crowd, a collective intake of breath, before it erupted into cheers and gasps. "She's a captain," someone shouted. "You messed up, man," called another, laughter mixing with outrage. Harris's eyes widened, his bravado crumbling like ash. You're a cop?" He stammered, his voice cracking, the cuffs in his hand suddenly heavy. Emma's gaze was steel, her voice low and unwavering. "Not just a cop, officer. Your superior." The crowd's cheers grew louder, a wave of triumph washing over the street. Phones captured every second. Harris's shaking hands, his flushed face, the badge gleaming like a verdict. Emma sat upright, her dignity unbroken despite the cuffs. "Uncuff me," she said, her tone calm but commanding. Harris fumbled with the keys, his movements clumsy, his authority shattered. The crowd chanted, "Let her go! Let her go!" Their voices a drumbeat of justice. As the cuffs fell away, Emma rubbed her wrists, her eyes never leaving Harris. She could see the fear in him now, the dawning realization of what he'd done. He hadn't just harassed a civilian. He'd targeted a captain who'd spent years dismantling officers like him. Emma stepped out of the cruiser, the crowd parting for her, their phones still rolling. A teenage boy, the one she'd nodded to earlier, grinned widely, his camera catching her every move. "You got him, ma'am," he called, and Emma gave him a small smile, her heart swelling with their support. But inside, a storm brewed. Anger at Harris's unchecked abuse, frustration at the system that had let him roam free, and a quiet fear of what could have happened if she hadn't been a captain. She turned to Harris, now shrinking under the weight of the crowd's gaze. "You're done here," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Step back." Harris stumbled backwards, his hands raised as if to ward off the truth. The crowd's cameras followed him, their lenses unforgiving. Emma's mind was already working, cataloging the evidence, the videos, his ignored radio call, the racial venom in his words. She knew his file, complaints stretching back years, all buried by a department too slow to act. But this time she'd make sure it stuck. As she stood tall, the crowd's cheers a shield around her, she felt the weight of her badge, not as a burden but as a weapon. Harris's eyes darted to the cruiser as if he could escape, but the street was alive with witnesses, and Emma was no longer just a target. She was a force, and the city was watching. The Detroit street pulsed with raw energy as Emma Carter stood tall, her captain's badge gleaming in the fading light, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded moments ago. Officer Daniel Harris, his face ashen, stood frozen, the weight of his actions crashing down around him. The crowd's cheers and jeers formed a cacophony, their phones still recording, capturing the moment his authority crumbled. Emma's wrists, red from the cuffs, were free now, but her resolve burned hotter than ever. She took charge with a quiet intensity, her voice cutting through the noise as she signaled to a pair of arriving officers, backup Harris hadn't anticipated. "Secure him," she said, nodding toward Harris, her tone leaving no room for argument. The officers hesitated, glancing at their colleague, but Emma's stare was unwavering. "Now." Harris's hands were cuffed with a satisfying click, his earlier bravado replaced by a stammering protest. "This is a mistake, I didn't know," he began, but the crowd drowned him out, their shouts of "Justice!" and "You can't hide now!" echoing down the street. Emma ignored his pleas, her focus on the evidence. She turned to the crowd, her voice calm but commanding. "Anyone with video, please stay. We need your footage." The young woman who'd been filming stepped forward, her phone clutched tightly, her eyes fierce with purpose. "I got it all," she said, and others nodded, their devices holding the truth of Harris's aggression. As the officers led Harris to a cruiser, Emma's mind raced. She knew his file, years of complaints, from verbal abuse to physical intimidation, all swept under the rug by a department reluctant to confront its own. But this time, the evidence was undeniable. The crowd's videos, his ignored robbery call, the racial venom in his words. She'd make sure Internal Affairs had everything. The teenage boy who'd filmed her nod earlier approached, his voice trembling with awe. "You're really a captain?" he asked. Emma smiled, her warmth cutting through the tension. "I am, and thank you for recording. You made a difference today." By evening, Emma sat at Evelyn's diner, the familiar hum of the place a balm after the storm. Evelyn slid a cup of coffee across the counter, her eyes brimming with pride. "You showed him, Emma," she said, her voice thick. "But what about the others like him?" Emma's gaze drifted to the window, where the city's lights flickered against the night. "This is just the start," she replied. She'd already filed a report with Internal Affairs, detailing Harris's actions and attaching the crowd's videos, now flooding social media with hashtags like "Justice for Emma" and "Daesh End Police Abuse." The story was trending, a spark igniting Detroit's long-simmering demand for change. Back at her apartment, Emma pored over Harris's file, her desk lamp casting shadows across the pages. Complaints stretched back a decade. Black residents targeted, excessive force ignored, witnesses dismissed. Her jaw tightened as she read, the pattern clear. Harris wasn't an anomaly, but a symptom of a system that protected its own. She drafted a request for a federal investigation, her words precise, her evidence airtight. By morning, the news had broken. Officer Harris was suspended pending review, and the FBI was probing not just him, but the department's handling of past complaints. Emma knew this would shake the force to its core, exposing officers who'd operated with impunity alongside Harris. The diner became a hub of conversation, residents gathering to share their own stories of harassment, their voices emboldened by Emma's stand. Evelyn, wiping down tables, leaned close during a lull. "You're giving folks hope, Emma," she said. "But you watch your back. Men like Harris don't go down easy." Emma nodded, the warning settling in her chest. She'd made enemies today, but she'd also ignited a movement. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "You're trending, Mom." So proud. Emma's heart swelled, but the weight of what lay ahead tempered her smile. This wasn't just about Harris. It was about dismantling the structures that had let him thrive. As night fell, Emma stood at her window, the city sprawling below. The viral videos had spread beyond Detroit, sparking protests in other cities, and calls for reform echoed nationwide. She thought of the students at the college, the boy with the camera, the woman who'd refused to stop filming. Their courage, their voices were her strength. Harris's arrest was a victory, but the real fight was just beginning. Emma knew she'd face pushback, department politics, threats from Harris's allies, but she was ready. The evidence was in her hands, the community at her back, and the truth was a fire no one could extinguish. She turned from the window, her resolve steel, knowing Detroit was watching and she wouldn't let them down. The community center in Detroit's heart buzzed with energy, its folding chairs filled with residents, students, and even a few uniformed officers, their faces a mix of hope and skepticism. Emma Carter stood at the podium, her captain's badge pinned proudly to her blazer, a quiet symbol of the authority she'd wielded so decisively against Officer Daniel Harris. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation, as news of her confrontation and Harris's arrest had spread like wildfire across the city and beyond. Social media still hummed with, "Justice for Emma," the crowd's videos replaying on every news outlet, a testament to the power of collective witness. Emma's gaze swept the room, landing on familiar faces. The young woman who'd filmed, the teenage boy with his camera, and Evelyn Brooks, her eyes shining with pride from the front row. Emma leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but warm. "What happened on that street wasn't just about me," she began, her words carrying the weight of truth. "It was about all of us, every person who's been targeted, silenced, or ignored. We stood together, and that's why we're here today." The room erupted in applause, hands raised, voices cheering. She spoke of the power of documenting injustice, of knowing one's rights, of refusing to let dignity be stripped away. "One voice can start a movement," she said, her eyes finding her daughter, Lily, in the crowd whose smile was a beacon of strength. "But it's our voices together that change the world." The fallout from Harris's arrest had been seismic. The federal investigation Emma triggered uncovered a network of corrupt officers, a web of unchecked complaints stretching back years. Harris wasn't alone. He was a cog in a machine that had protected misconduct for too long. The probe led to suspensions, resignations, and new policies. Body cameras mandated, citizen complaint processes streamlined, and transparency measures enforced. Emma had become a key figure in these reforms, her desk now a hub of policy drafts and community feedback. She'd spent late nights with Evelyn and other residents, listening to their ideas, ensuring their voices shaped the change. The diner, once a target of Harris's harassment, was now a symbol of resilience, its tables filled with organizers planning the next steps. But Emma knew the fight wasn't over. Resistance lingered within the department, officers loyal to the old guard, whispers of retaliation. She'd seen the glares, felt the chill in precinct hallways. Yet the community support was her armor. At the forum, a student from her college lecture approached, clutching a notebook. "I'm documenting everything now, Captain," he said, his voice earnest. "Just like you told us." Emma's heart swelled, a spark of hope amidst the battle. She handed him her card, her voice soft but firm. "Keep it up. We need you." The boy beamed, his resolve a mirror of her own. The case against Harris had become a national symbol, sparking protests and discussions about police accountability across the country. News anchors debated systemic racism. Activists cited Emma's story as proof that change was possible. She'd spoken at rallies. Her words carried on airwaves, urging communities to stand united, to record, to demand justice. But tonight in this room, she felt the weight of every story shared with her. The students' fears, Evelyn's warnings, the crowd's courage. She closed her speech with a call to action. This city, this country, is ours to shape. Don't wait for permission to hold power accountable. We are the change. The room rose in a standing ovation, their applause a thunderous affirmation. Lily rushed to her side, hugging her tightly, whispering, "You're my hero, Mom." Emma held her close, her eyes glistening but her resolve unbroken. As the crowd dispersed, residents lingered, sharing their stories, pledging to keep the fight alive. Emma stood among them, no longer just a captain but a symbol of what was possible when one stood against oppression. Outside, Detroit's skyline glittered under a starlit sky, its scars and beauty intertwined. Emma stepped into the cool night, her breath visible in the autumn air. The road ahead was long, reforms to implement, trust to rebuild, officers like Harris to confront. But she wasn't alone. The community's voices, the cameras, the notebooks, they were her strength, a chorus that would not be silenced. Emma Carter, once a target, now a beacon, walked forward, her steps firm, her heart ablaze with purpose. The city watched, and she would lead them toward justice, one determined step at a time. Final ending words. And in that moment, under the weight of a city's hope, Emma knew the fight was theirs to win, together, unyielding, unstoppable.